Friends, colleagues, and family members, I think we've managed to join in, and old neighbor. So today, Dr. Lemke and we came up with this presentation, Weight of Sadness and the link between depression and obesity. So this has been, I think, a topic I've been passionate about. And many of the slides we are talking about was presented at an American Psychiatric Association, annual meeting a few years ago. So why is this important? So as mankind, we have changed quite a bit. Okay, and sometimes when I look at my children, I feel like, we are going back, so yeah. So, I have a 14-year-old, we have become more and more sedentary. The lifestyle has changed quite a bit. And I think we are doing more in a short period of time, and we are using technology. So there is not as much reliance on physical activity. And we are seeing, I think, a high increase in rates of obesity. Next slide. So, and why is this important? So, obesity, unsurprisingly, increases the risk of heart disease and stroke. So, a big risk factor. Hypertension, diabetes, gallstones, osteoarthritis, gout. So, a simple increase, I think, when you look at, increase in BMI by 5 points, it's going to increase the risk of esophageal cancer by more than 50%, 52. Conservative estimates would suggest, 24% increase in colon cancer. Okay? And if someone has pre-existing risk factors, again, I think this gets compounded considerably. So endometrial cancer by 59%. In women, gallbladder cancer over 50%. Postmenopausal breast cancer by 4%. So when we are looking at this, we're looking at, a sex differential between, men and women. And we'll talk about it as we go along around depression. Women seems to be more vulnerable to the neurobiological aspects of obesity. And when we look at things, data on maternal obesity during the time of pregnancy, actually the risk of congenital malformations is actually going to be higher. So when we talk with developmental pediatricians, sometimes I think they talk about, genetic factors. There are factors, not the DNA, what happens to the DNA. And those factors could play a role as well. So it's like this. So, when we look at obesity definitions, we are mainly looking at BMI stuff. BMI above 25 to 30 is overweight. 30 is classified as obesity. So 41% now of, adult Americans are actually obese, 32% overweight. So we are looking at over, approximately 73% of the population having majority of the risk factors that we talked about. In children, obesity in children predicts obesity in adulthood. So 22% now children and adolescents are actually obese as well. So the number that we are seeing here is actually getting bigger and bigger. So when I look at these numbers in 2014, 2015, the numbers were actually, 5 to 6%, smaller. So we are, as a society, becoming obese. And healthcare is expensive. So just the cost, money we spend on obesity, conservatively, these are conservative estimates, it's going to be, as a nation, $190 to $270 billion. So that is a very, very, and most people think it is a small, it is, a huge, underestimate. Because we are looking at direct health costs. So we're looking at, days, people are off work, those kind of indirect costs, usually, we need to add a factor of 5 or 6. So 250 billion becomes, 1.5 billion. So 6 million cases of diabetes, 5 million cases of coronary heart disease, and more than 40,000 cancer are actually, preventable. So we looked at, 5% numbers, just look at 1% numbers. 1%, BMI, across the United States increase, it's going to increase 0.1 to 2.4 million cases of diabetes. So, when we look further, at least 1.5 million cases of cardiovascular disease, so less heart attacks, 73 to 127,000 cases of cancer. So we're looking at huge numbers here. And, if we look at, I think, life, it can be looked at chronologically. One way of looking at this quality of life. I'm able to do all the things I'm doing now, it comes out as a quality of life year. Right? And I think as a nation, we lose 16 million quality of life years, just by 1% increase in obesity. So I think, again, just a small increase in weight, we have, I think, repercussions across. So the next is going to be, many times when we look at, I think, mental health problems are fairly common. They're going to be, I think, 1 in 10, sometimes 1 in 6 amongst us. If we add, I think, obesity on top of it, despite adequate treatments, if we match all, I think, variables, someone who's obese is going to have, I think, a poorer prognosis than someone who is not. The same is true across other disorders too. Same like, I think, diabetes, cardiovascular, I think, improvement, cancer survivors. Again, I think this plays a role. The obesity by itself, can actually cause, I think, mental health problems. We talk about it as we go along. So when you look at all these numbers, okay, we are looking at, I think, a huge increase of major depressive disorder and dysthymia. Dysthymia means, I think, being sad, for long periods of time. So next slide, please. So obesity increases the risk of mental health conditions. So the other point is, if someone is obese and has mental health conditions, then again, I think, they are, I think, less likely to get better than someone who is not. They get better, but not as much. So that is, I think, a big thing to bear in mind. It's a perfect vicious cycle. Adolescent obesity, so when you look at, I think, teenage girls, I think, they carry a higher risk of depression than teenage boys. Something, I think, neurobiological changes that happen in puberty. If you add, I think, obesity on top of it, actually, I think the risk increases, I think, 4 times. The link between depression and I think, girls, this differential is well replicated. The second thing is the link between, being heavy and I think, depression in adolescent girls is heavily replicated. So it is a pure, I think, a very neurobiological thing that we are looking at. And someone, I think, who has obesity has 55% higher risk of being, I think, depressed actually. And when someone who is depressed, again, that by itself can help people gain weight, and that increases the risk by another 50%. So when you look at the numbers are fairly comparable. So sometimes it looks as if, I think, we are looking at the same phenomena. So they both went together, and like I talked about, the response to antidepressant medications, I think, Dr. Schultz here would say, even I think psychotherapy is going to be, I think, a lot lower in someone if they have obesity as a risk factor. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Let's look at, I think, the reasons why. So looking at the brain, right? I think, so I'm hungry, I go home, I think, my mom, I think, cooks me a nice meal, I eat. Being mom, she wants me to eat more and more, I think, So, but I think after a while, I have to say, even for me, I think, mom, I cannot eat anymore. So what is happening here is, we have the lateral hypothalamus region, okay, that promotes satiety. So it is like this. If someone puts an electrode there, and then I think if it is stimulated, then I feel full, okay? Say if mom, I don't think my mom knows this, but if she takes it away, then I'm going to keep on eating. I'm never going to feel, I think, full. So this, I think people, I think, when you look at mice experiments, so this was, I think, a very thin mice before the experiment. And this relation, when this was, I think, kind of ablated, then the mice, I think, did not think, I think it was ever full. So it kept on, I think, eating. So it gained, I think, a huge weight. It's like this. So, and again, I think, so we look at, I think, another brain region called an arcuate nucleus, that actually promotes, I think, feeding behavior. So if this part of the brain, is somehow these cells are eliminated, then I think, there is going to be quite a bit of an imbalance. And most of the time, this would lead to death, because just I think there is no feeding. So one of my, classmates in residency did a year of PhD in Cambridge. actually looking at, I think, this neuropeptide Y, which promotes this feeding, actually, if there's an imbalances in anorexia nervosa, because teenage girls, they stop eating, they lose weight, it's going to be a whole lot of body image kind of changes. So a lot of neurological factors going there. So, and again, I think, when we look at, I think, neuropeptide Y, these neurons, when they're completely, I think, ablated, then I think people would stop, I think, eating, they lose interest in the environment. It's not unless the drive goes down. Okay. But GABA is a chemical that is low when we are anxious. When we are looking at GABA is high, they are going to be more relaxed. So artificially, if I introduce GABA, that is, I'm making these mice mentally less anxious, actually the feeding behavior comes back. So again, I think a roundabout way, even just looking at this mice research, looking at motivation to do things, curiosity towards things around us, and feeding behavior, anxiety, they're all connected together. So when we look at things, I think, many times, fasting state, okay, so what is happening in fasting state? Dr. Lemke will talk about the small, fasting state, I think we're actually, getting your energy resources from fat breakdown. So we're going to have, ketones, those bodies, kind of breakdown. When we are well fed, most of the energy, is taken from glucose. So the brain is smart. This is what it is going to look at. It's going to look at, am I in a fasting state? I'm in a fed state, based upon, these two imbalances. And then it sets a set of things in motion that promotes our behavior. Say if I'm starving, then I look for food. If I'm full, I take a siesta. So it's like this. So there are many things about, the brain that we are understanding better and better. So, cannabis use. Cannabis use has gone up quite a bit ever since, marijuana has become a commercial commodity. Again, started off in Europe, around Amsterdam, and it is spreading across the world. And so young people smoking cannabis, younger and younger, some highly potent forms of ingestion, and are, increasing. So people, know that when they take cannabis, they're going to eat a lot. They're going to eat a lot of brownies, those kind of things. Cannabis stimulates appetite. Cannabis does something else too. Cannabis causes a set of euphoria. And this, chemical was first isolated. So the lab scientists were unsure as to what to call it. So they looked at world languages and they picked up a word called Anand. Anand in Sanskrit, in Indian language, means bliss. It has some Latin connections too. So they went in and they said, they call it Anandamite. And it is like the higher degree of Anandamite means, higher bliss and higher feeding behavior. So then people thought, how about, I just block it. So when medicines, the cannabinoid blockers came around, actually they reduced the feeding behavior. And actually they made people very, very depressed. And sometimes to the extent suicidal. The extent these medicines, they're there for a very short period of time, it actually, were actually withdrawn for health reasons. So another connection that the appetite and mood, are somehow very, very closely connected. So talk about the brain, then what's happening to the rest of the body. So rest of the body also sends, signals. There's always some signals, neuropeptides, that gets released from the gut. So when I joined med school in 1997, we knew that these peptides were there, but the significance was not entirely clear. So as we go along, we will learn more about these neuropeptides. One, you might want to keep an eye is GLP-1. Okay, Dr. Lemke will talk about it a little bit more when we talk about interventions. GLP-1, impacts the appetite. And it is basically a gut-based neuropeptide. It has some action in the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is our control center. That, more or less, dictates what the body does. So when I'm stressed, I feel like I need to eat more. When I'm relaxed, I eat less. Okay, So when we are relaxed, the parasympathetic system, is going to be active. I'm stressed, the sympathetic system, epinephrine, norepinephrine is rushing around, my heart is beating fast, and I think my muscles are tense, that becomes active. And this plays a key role in promoting behaviors. So, to the extent, the vagal nerve more or less innervates, it's a parasympathetic nerve that innervates, I think, quite a few organs. In vast majority connections will go to the GI system, the gut, some will go to sweating, those kind of things. So vagal nerve stimulators are used in certain kinds of epilepsies. Actually, I think, optimizing this vagal nerve stimulator could, in a way, promote satiety, and I think could be used as a weight loss, innovation. Guess what? It is also, I think, used for ultra treatment resistant depression. It's a it's a procedure that's put in, and I think, the flip side is, I think it changes the way we speak. The voice becomes very coarse. If I had it on, I would be speaking like Darth Vader. So, but again, I think, again, another connection. The more relaxed we are, the other things, the satiety has some chances of kicking in. So this is a peptide. I think what remembering. Okay, again, it helps us understand the biology of it. Okay, so leptin, I think leptos, I think means thin in Greek. Okay, so it is actually released from the adipose tissue, comes from the fat tissue. Leptin suppresses appetite. So higher degree of leptin, suppresses appetite. So if I think, someone has congenital leptin deficiency, they're going to be obese. Also, they will also, I think, have a high degrees of depression. So again, I think, leptin goes back to the old tracks that we talked about. Is it the sugar track? Is it, I think, am I using sugar? Am I think, breaking down fats? Okay. Then I think the brain makes a decision, satiety and all those chemicals get up. Leptin, I think, is a signal, I think, that can mediate this. Now, what happens, I think, when someone gains weight is, sometimes they develop something called leptin resistance. So there's a huge amount of leptin going around, but the leptin does not act. So that means, I think, the satiety is not reached. As a result, there's going to be a more feeding kind of a behavior. So once someone loses weight, it becomes a lot easier for them to maintain it, because sometimes the leptin imbalance sometimes kind of, I think, gets reset. So, anytime, I think, when we look at this, any research study connecting between depression, and I think, obesity, and if there is a leptin, many times you don't even have to read through the whole things, because you know the answers before that. And those things are not even publishable because they've been published so many times. So another interesting, neuropeptide, this brain-derived neurotropic factor. So I'm old, when I joined med school in 97, this was when we were dissecting the brain, my anatomy professor said, one slice here is never going to regenerate. It's already, I think, a cadaver brain that we were dissecting. So, I think I started practicing with the notion that I think, brain is a very rigid structure. If there is one damage, a small stroke here, it's not going to recover. Okay, and that's what I believed for quite some time. So there was an interesting research, wherein, we don't do things to mice. We don't like them. I don't know why, but we don't, So a group of scientists actually, I think, ablated, did some, I think, inside certain parts of the, cortex. So looking at on paper, there's no way this is going to, I think, heal. Okay, it's going to be a scar. That's it. It's not going to get any better. So two sets of mice. One mice was fairly immobile. Okay, the mice was not moving at all. Okay. The second mice was actually, they put it on a nice wheel, it was actually forced exercise. Surprise, there was a lot more healing. First of all, I think there was healing. That was a surprise. There was, I think, more healing on the mice, I think, which is actually, I think, running on the spinning wheel. So, and then I think this group of researchers got more intrigued. They looked at, I think, what is different there. What they did realize is the brain-derived neurotropic factor is actually, I think, much higher. So brain-derived neurotropic factor, improves when someone's mood improves. When someone is depressed, it kind of goes down. Now, if I have some inflammation, for any medical condition, it is going to go down. If I exercise, it is going to go up. So there is a big thought process. Actually, the higher degree of brain-derived neurotrophic factor is actually protective against things like Alzheimer's disease and many other, I think, neurodegenerative conditions. So I think, we need to do what we can to increase the BDNF. So, so again, I think, leptin, if it works well, if it is not resistant, increases BDNF. Say, I think, I have leptin resistance. So leptin is not working. I have huge amounts of leptin, but it's not working. That means BDNF activity is going to be low. Secondly, this can lead to more depression. So again, I think, somehow we think, this is a common mediator. Just like insulin resistance, there's a huge amount of glucose, it's not going in. Just like this, leptin resistance is probably playing a role in this phenomenon. So when we look at, I think, congenital obesity, we need to look at the gene, I think, which commonly gets published. It's called the fat mass and obesity associated protein. And I think, it, I think, increases, quite a bit of, I think, obesity, fat mass deposition, those kind of things. The current thought is, there is something epigenetic, that is, the environment could mediate this. Sometimes I think, starvation or I think, excess fat during, I think, when I was in the fetal period could actually, I think, play a role as well. So there is accumulation of, I think, genetics and environmental influences. But biology plays a huge role. Okay. So next please. So I think, we talked about quite a few things. If you look at functional MRI images, okay, there are two ways of looking at it. One way is, okay, we can look at a, still camera, Mandy takes excellent pictures, you look at a picture. Second thing is you look at the video reel, okay. Functional MRI scans, they're not, I think, prime time medicine for the most part yet. There are some rare conditions we use it. So they give us an understanding about, I think, how the brain works. So for example, I'm doing math. If someone does an fMRI, then I think, which part of my brain is actually active, during math, which is kind of things. So then I think we show pictures of food. To the extent, I think, we give food cues, like I think smells, those kind of things. It was actually painful walking through the cafeteria, nice smells, I think, aroma of food, and walking back without eating, right? Those cues. And then look at what brain regions are being activated. So there is a differential, I think, people who are obese versus who are non-obese. So even the brain, I think the way it takes in food, looks at food, is vastly different. So many times, I think, we are, human beings, sometimes there's a lot of, I think, shaming, body shaming about weight, those kind of things. And we all zone in on motivation. And many times my thought process is, there's a huge amount of biology here, we should, I think, factor in. There are, I think, our human body, does not have a good homeostatic mechanism to glucose. So when we look at things, I think all beings, it's going to be about survival. Survival equates food, water. Okay, and I think you save yourself from predator. So I think, surplus has not been an issue, for quite some time. Surplus has been an issue post-industrial revolution. So same way here. I think when mice, when they're given a lot of, I think, sugary liquid, and then they keep on going. They keep on going. They keep on sipping it. The extent they cannot even stop. Okay, so and we human beings, I think we are no different as well. Okay, because we still have the same kind of neuronal wiring. So, I think, when we look at things, it's not just the food, okay, and the emotions that go with food, okay, the relief we get with food. So when we get starving, we become cranky, okay, because I think, it is exactly the same feeling. Someone who is, I think, addicted to alcohol, actually, I think he does not get alcohol. Okay? You follow me? So, and that person becomes very, very tense. And I think it's the same feeling if I am, I think, in the wild, after wild tiger, I'm going to be scared, right? And this part of the brain is amygdala. Amygdala is our anxiety center. Okay? Food cues sometimes prime this. When this center, I think, fires, it leads to some kind of an action. If amygdala is firing, I get into a fight-flight response. I'll be urged to act on it. And I think when this fires, I'm not going to think that well. You follow me? It's not just food. I think, food cues could bring it in. See, if I'm that tense, I eat food. What is it going to do? It's going to, I think, calm down the amygdala. Just because the amygdala is calming down, I get a sense of relief, which again could equate to some pressure. Okay? So there is, I think, all those things going on. And I think, when we look at this, so when I think I'm doing something pleasurable, there's a chemical called dopamine that gets released. If I think, if I do something, I think, if I don't get adequate pleasure of doing something, I'm less likely to do it. Sometimes what happens with satiety is, when I think, someone does it once, there's a certain dopamine points that get released. Obesity, what happens is, there is going to be fewer number of, I think, this dopamine release with food. So that means, I think, one has to eat more, actually get that released. The pleasure is not there. So which means we're making quantity. It is, I think, in a basic neural, this is the circuit that drives us to motivation. Okay, that drives our motivation really. So why are we at work today? Because there's something, I think, we are looking something good coming out of it later on. It's actually pleasurable. So in summary, when someone is depressed, there are things going on in the body. Okay, there is a high degree of steroid kind of a secretion, glucocorticoids, cortisol levels are going to be high. Even I think if Dr. Lemke gives me a cortisol shot, if I'm depressed, the cortisol levels, I think, they are not going to, I think, change that much. Okay, it is, I think, perpetually high. I think there is going to be a high degree of, I think, stress chemicals that go high. Okay, and also, when we look at it carefully, inflammatory chemicals are high. So ulcerative colitis, someone I think has an acute exacerbation. Now they look depressed despite I think pain control. Why? A lot of inflammation. Tuberculosis, we don't see it anymore. You see someone with tuberculosis, they look terribly depressed. High degree of inflammation. Okay? So obesity, depression will be seen as a pro-inflammatory kind of environment. The pro-inflammatory kind of environment promotes leptin resistance and all the other neurobiological changes that we talked about. What does it do in turn? It leads to fat accumulation and obesity. And we already, I think, looked at the data that I think high fat accumulation obesity means depression. What is depression going to do? Because more inflamed, increase the risk of cancers, everything. And then I think, it is like a perfect vicious cycle. So let me, I think, pass it over to Dr. Lemke.
I usually just shout in this room, but that's okay. I can put this. All right. Dr. Kolli, you made me remember my med school days of neuroanatomy, and I must have been sleeping through those lectures. I don't know, but I do vaguely remember some of those. All right, so I try to mind the weight of sadness and the sadness of weight, because I think depression and obesity share a lot of the same stigma. I think there is I think we can all agree that in our country, probably depression and obesity are very misunderstood, and unfortunately malaligned too as well. I think there's so much misunderstanding about causes and treatments and some of those things too as well. So I think when we consider these two, I think they are very closely related in that regard in the public's perception. And if you leave me with one thing here today, if I leave you and Dr. Kolli leave you with one thing today, is that just as depression is a disease, obesity is a disease. Go ahead, next slide. So diabetes, disease? Sure. Heart disease, absolutely. Cancer, a disease. Absolutely, 100%. And we'd all agree that when I have somebody come into my office with one of these three, or I can put Alzheimer's down here as well, neurocognitive thing, most people aren't necessarily blaming themselves for that process. They don't blame themselves for cancer, for heart disease, or even for diabetes. But for some reason, society likes to put the blame on somebody if they're obese or if they're depressed. There's this overwhelming sense that something wrong, right? And so if I leave you with nothing more today, if we leave you with nothing more, that obesity is a disease process that is recognizable by all the great chemistry that we just heard. And that we need to fight it that way. We need to come together as practitioners and as people and fight that together. Some of it, unfortunately, is we're fighting an obesogenic society too as well. So diabetes, cancer, heart disease are all interrelated in that they're, I think, factored into a lot of things which we'll discover. Now, obesity is a disease. I hope you'll see that by the end of this. And unfortunately, it weaves its way through all of these in a pattern sometimes. So they are interchangeable. Diabetes, if you have higher risk of obesity, you have a higher risk of diabetes and worsening complications. Cancer, more obesity, worse the outcomes of cancer and the higher incidence of cancer. Heart disease, no doubt, higher incidence of obesity, higher incidence of heart disease and vice versa too as well. So just saying the word obesity, there's a movement afoot, interestingly, in the American College of Obesity Medicine to change that word because it has so much of a stigmata. And I think there's one that makes sense to me is adiposity-based chronic disease, but it's just too long. Adiposity is the collection of that. So go to the next slide there. So this is just a comparative. With type 2 diabetes, 11%, 37 million people, but if we throw pre-diabetes in there, it's a much higher number. But 37 million people, obviously it's an epidemic of our society today. Coverage is very broad. There's lots of anti-drug regimens. We're always desensitized to diabetes. Everybody has got it. And so we have lots of different treatment options for it. There's standards of care. We know exactly how to treat diabetes. The American Diabetes Association tells me exactly how I step through diabetes and what medicines I need and how I need to do that. Obesity, 120 million people, 31% of the population, 41% of the population are either in that overweight obese category. All the different grades or stages of obesity. Coverage is very narrow. We can't say something about the I hate to say that, still drives the train a lot of times. And as a practitioner, unfortunately, if I'm not going to get paid for it, I probably don't talk about it very much. We're transparent. 1 to 2% of the people treated with medication that need to be treated. Only 2% of the people that need to be talked about with bariatric surgery, which is kind of taboo, right? It is not taboo. It should not be taboo. And some people, that's the only thing that will fix it. But only 1 to 2% of those people that are candidates actually even get a discussion with their doctor. And doctors guilty as charged. I don't talk to other people because I don't think it's going to get covered. I don't give them the benefit of the doubt that it is an option. It's a life-sustaining, life-saving treatment option. Not for everybody, but certainly they're much safer than what we ever imagine. I'm not going to talk about that today, but I will tell you that the treatment with bariatric surgery is safer than we ever imagined it was in the right hands. Therapy is uncommon, especially for most people at risk. What do you do? Well, you have this diet and then walk more, right? That has been our mainstay, unfortunately, for a lot of times, myself included. And there are standards of care yet. It's good. After Dr. Kolli said, I'm going to try for my American Obesity Medicine Boards, but there's standard of care. We're working on it. We're working on trying to get that to be more standardized, what we do. So this is the definition. Obesity is a disease in which disordered regulation of caloric intake results in high levels of adiposity. That is the collection of fat cells. High levels of obesity impairs health via weight-related complications. Obesity, the idea of putting on fat it's an evolutionary problem. When we're in a starvation state, our body says, okay, I have to store something because I don't have anything available. How am I going to store that? I'm going to store that as fat because it's something I can store. I can bring it to my blood when I need to. I can use the sugar that I need. On sugar at a higher rate than any other thing. That's what it uses to operate. So we need the fat cells in. It's just the excess that unfortunately does that. Now, but the scary statistic too is 5%. If a child at 5 years old is in the percentile, which classifies it as obese, 95% chance of being obese as an adult. So we're either losing the battle by 5 years old in some situations. I would say losing, but we're behind. And then we've got to up our game a little bit too as well. So that speaks to what Dr. Kolli said about the maternal overweight creates, unfortunately, babies are overweight too, which is sad. So next slide. This is a busy slide, but I think it emphasizes the fact that obesity is a disease process. We can sit up here and talk about heart disease, and we can give you the very intricate the process of what happens when you have a heart attack and how the plaque forms and it ruptures and all those things. But this is all about determinants. So, genetics, absolutely. Susceptibility genes. We know there's lots of susceptibility genes out there that at risk count, over 100 or more. Gene interactions, which means mutations that may occur that make somebody susceptible to that as well. That's just regardless of what you're doing already, in the child. Race, we definitely know that there are changes, there are differences in the way people store and process food based on race. Unfortunately, some of those at higher risk are the ones that do that. Epigenetics, we'll talk about that a little bit more. Epigenetics is how genes are expressed. You have genes that are turned on by environment. That is epigenetics. What results is the process of epigenetics. Biological factors, obviously, in utero, which means when your mom is pregnant with you, that is passed through. And so there are definitely some things that occur now with you. Diabetic babies, somebody don't know, diabetic babies, your moms are diabetic babies, right? Insulin, growth factor, birth rate, same thing. Gender, males and females different as we get study just came out that as you finish older, there's more risk there because you're losing muscle mass with that. Other diseases, absolutely. If you're on cancer therapy, on steroids, you're putting on the and unfortunately, suppression drugs, antidepressant drugs have a high propensity to cause weight gain, and it's something that we really have to deal with as practitioners. When somebody goes up, there are a lot of medicines that create that. Food availability, quality, I think we don't live in food deserts. We live in food swamps. We're just surrounded by food that is highly caloric and very nutritionally deficient, and it's just so readily available. If we track this, I gave you a graph and it showed when this all started, when we learned how to process and manufacture food quickly. I don't want to blame McDonald's, but that's when it all kind of went off the rails, right? I don't think I'll get sued. So obviously the environment is very much obesogenic. Socioeconomic status. Again, cheaper food tends to be less healthy. It's hard to eat healthy, right? You go to your store, you get your fruits and veggies, and they're with them 2 or 3 berries, and you spend all this money on blueberries for $6. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. I go get fries for that. Education status, better at teaching people how to, what healthy food looks like. Obviously, dietary preferences, physical activity. Are part of similar to that, but those are and some of the behaviors, as Dr. Kolli just described, are beyond your control there too. So, in other words, once you kind of get into that pattern where your body's biology has been altered, it becomes very difficult for your body to know the difference of what is right and what is wrong as far as health is concerned and what your body needs. How do I take in that food when I've already got plenty of energy stored up? Cultural factors. 100%. Unfortunately, there are certain, and I think in the Hispanic population, eating healthy is hard. I think there, some situations of you don't have the availability sometimes of that, and that is fault, but it is something that we do need to turn around because we're all human beings. And diurnal life variations, different ways that our body reacts to different stages of life and also different stages of the day. Your body processes food a little better in the morning than it does in the evening. We all eat our biggest meal in the evening, right? So it's just this, we can shift that, our body is better set up to process that food. Go ahead. So, challenging treating obesity, of which there are many, some have already said, one size does not fit all. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand because that's embarrassing. But how many of you, I'm sure we're thinking here, have tried some way to lose weight and it worked for your friend, right? Oh, well, that person lost 40 pounds and I'm losing weight. Why is that? Why can somebody do the exact same thing? Why can somebody eat the exact same thing and get the benefit that you do? We'll talk about that. Individual response to weight loss intervention, I think is a real tricky thing because unfortunately that same scenario gets a lot of people depressed, gets a lot of people off the rails, and they just figure it and they give up. So many factors to consider in the diagnosis and treatment of obesity. Go ahead to the next slide. This is a kind of a busy slide, but I think it does kind of play into all of the different things that factor into that externally and from the environment. Excessive caloric intake of food. I think that is a part of it, but probably not as much as what we want to think. It's not calories in, calories out. If it was, then this would be pretty easy and we could probably take care of it. Processed food, that to me is really the devil. I mean, that is processed food was created, 50, 60, 70 years ago, people were eating stuff that was out there eating water and meat and things that wasn't highly processed food. The body just doesn't know what to do with that many times, and it really creates problems. So irregular eating patterns, there again, the people eat one meal and it's at evening time. They skip breakfast, they skip lunch, and they wonder why they're still gaining weight. And your eating patterns create that. It's not set up the way your body wants to. Okay. With physical activity, screen time, computer sitting at where we need to be. Another one of the scourges of our modern society, our unfortunate opulence is going to kill us. We're sitting way more than what we ever did. I could talk, and I do give a talk on inadequate sleep, but you wouldn't realize how much 1 hour of sleep off of 7 to 8 hours of a normal adult. 1 hour less sleep increases your risk of obesity dramatically. Okay, so Dr. Kolli talked about stress and cortisol, weight-limiting medications, which I said there are several out there. Unfortunately, some of those are needed in other treatment options. And then life changes. As we remember, as you were young, you could eat whatever you want, and you just would burn it off, and you wouldn't gain it. Now all of a sudden, menopause comes or menopause comes, and it's off the rails. And that's a physiologic thing. That's not a free will type of thing. Go ahead. So, 4 strategies for weight loss sounds simple, right? Where the food eat, how much food we eat, pretty significantly. What we eat, obviously, that matters to a certain extent how we process foods. As foods that are very high in caloric density, as good, if I would give you a 500-calorie piece of cheesecake, that's much different than 500 calories of carrots or celery, so it's just what we eat matters. And really, as I said earlier, a lot of people are eating very late hours or eating at different times when their body isn't really ready for it too as well. I mean, I love the idea of intuitive eating. I eat when I was hungry. It sounds intuitive or simple, but not so much. And then what do we eat? And we'll come to that in just a second. So precision medicine. We use precision medicine a lot in everything else. Diabetes now, we have medicines that seem to work better for a certain individual. Heart disease, we're gaining on that, where we're developing cancer. That's really a big thing right now. A lot of where we take the person's own cells and then we manipulate them and put them back in, and that's precision. But we don't really have that in obesity medicine. So one size fits all is not working. So this is a concept called a phenotype. Now a genotype is your genes. Okay, you can't change that. Okay, so right over here, genomics is our genes that suggest what disease we might be predisposed to, and we gives you the incomplete picture of health. So all of us have lots of genes in our body, some of which are turned on, some of which fortunately are not. We have 7 lethal genes, and that is true. We have lots of genes that if they're turned on, things go bad. And so the key here on the immune disease process is turn those bad genes off, and that includes weight gain. So lifestyle environment, we just talked about all those over here: exercise, what we eat, smoking, medications, all those external factors. And when you bring that together, that's called a phenotype. A phenotype is what we actually see sitting in front of us. We don't see the genes, but we can see what's sitting in front of us. Next slide. So this study done by Dr. Costa at the Mayo Clinic, and I just bring this up because I thought that Dr. Kolli was really intriguing, because I think it's just an example. There's so many out there now. I think of it. We're starting to zero in on it. And I could, I'll talk about the other one. There's another one out there that talks about the microbiome or bacteria or gut, and how our gut is such a big factor in how our body reacts to food, how our body processes that food. And so, by studying what bacteria you have in your gut, in your poop, it sounds crazy, but that tells us how you're going to respond to certain foods and whether you're going to be successful in that. But the study basically looked at trying to determine why it is that certain diets, if you will, or certain treatment options are successful for certain people and other ones are not. You can do that surgery on 100 people, and not everybody will lose weight. And you can give medicines to 100 people, and there'll be some people who gain weight on that medicine. There'll be some people who lose weight. Why is that? And I think this is where the study, Dr. Costa and his group is doing some pretty interesting stuff. So there's about, if we look at all these different ways of dividing up how the book works, or why they're successful and why not, it's because of these phenotypes there too. So hungry brain is satiation, knowing when the meal is over. In other words, there are situations that is chemically determined where a person, and it's called leptin resistance, but you just never fall. You can eat any, it's for instance, a person goes back for thirds, seconds, and thirds. Okay. So there's definitely a chemical change that creates what's called hungry brain. I don't know when I'm full. Then there's something called hungry gut, the ability to not eat in between periods. I want to snack on everything. I'm constantly hungry. No matter what I've eaten, I'm going to go out in 2 hours. I'm going to eat more. Okay, I'm going to eat whatever all throughout the day. Well, I just never feel satisfied from a meal. Okay, so that's satiety. Satiation is the sensation of being satisfied with full. Satiety is the sensation that I don't, I'm satisfied with what I had. So, and then emotional hunger, which is basically triggered by eating in response to negative or positive emotions. And I think that spoke a lot of what Dr. Kolli said. Emotional hunger is probably overlapping with a lot of things in certain situations. And I think that is what I hear a lot is I eat because I'm bored, I eat because I'm angry or whatever it is. That's my go-to. And I've learned that that's my go-to. That's slow burn. So, one of the things I haven't talked about yet is your resting metabolic rate. If I measured all of your body's burn factor, if you will, how much you burn during the course of a day when you just sit there. Some people are burning a lot, other people are burning little. And so that's not fair. Some people, two people with the same amount of food, the one's going to gain weight, the one's going to lose weight. That's not fair. Well, that has a little bit to do with the resting metabolic expenditure, how fast your body metabolizes that. So what they did is they were able to evaluate through a very complicated process that they did, not really complicated, but they brought them in and they went through this evaluation, measuring their gastric emptying time, measuring the rest of metabolic rate, evaluating their satiety, how full they were, a lot of different things there too as well. And so we kind of put these people into the different phenotypes. And there's a lot of overlap, by the way, but they tried to take the predominance. And why is that important? Because what they found is when they found people who really fit in this, their success rate on treatment with medications or bariatric surgery was dramatically better, almost 50%. About 450, but I still think that this is a really interesting new frontier that we're going to see is finding out why it is that individuals use on certain treatment options that we do. Okay. And that includes lifestyle and diet. Okay. We'll go to the next slide. and they'll see a little bit of an idea. So this is the last slide, but this is the end result of that. So if you take somebody with hungry brain, where they just never feel full, they can eat for seconds and thirds, and you think, how can that do that? So we give a volumetric high fiber diet, which basically expands out. It tells them they're a little fuller. Higher fiber typically will fill up faster. If you eat 4 apples versus 4 Snickers, you're going to feel full on the apples much more than the Snickers as well. So volumetric diets, they gave them 150 minutes of exercise a week, and obviously wellness coaching too as well to keep encouraging. And I think that's critical if you're going to be successful in either one of the diet or medications. Now, hungry gut. Remember, you're always hungry when you're always searching, and you guys all probably know if you eat eggs and bacon in the morning, you're satisfied, right? And that's why people come back to that all the time. You feel, oh, okay, I'm good. But if you eat a bowl, like I do, 10 o'clock, I'm ready to eat my shoe, right? So that's the whole idea. So what they do is they get a high protein, low calorie diet with pre-meal protein supplementation 3-5 meals a day. So they kept that protein level up a little bit, and that satisfied them because protein does satisfy a little bit better. Still 150 minutes a week, 10,000 steps, and then the weekly sessions with the wellness coach too as well, because obviously that is such a critical touch point to make sure that people have that support that they need. Emotional hunger and low calorie diet with no snacks. So realizing that just like when you eat something that gives you that satisfaction, creates that dopamine, that creates that feedback loop. You got to stop that feedback loop up. It's just like somebody who has alcohol, but alcohol, it's going to keep doing the same thing. So, we had to, what they do is they give them a very low calorie diet, meal replacements. In some situations, they exercise them, and then behavioral counseling with cognitive CBT, it's called cognitive behavioral therapy. So they taught them what their cues were, cues, cravings, response, reward, the kind of the cascade that we go through. And then they also had another subset of slow burn. So there's people that were really, doing everything right, but their metabolism just wasn't up. Same thing, low calorie diet, high supplementation, and then high interval training and resistance training. Remember, your muscles are the #1 consumer of sugar in your body. And so I have a lot of people come in and say, I'm walking my 10,000 steps. I'm really going at it. Are you doing any weightlifting? Are you doing anything for your muscles? No, not doing, but you're missing the opportunity to utilize the rest of your body as a source of sugar and get that sugar burned and get the fat out of it. And the place where fat is stored, most people don't see it. It's actually in the muscles. Okay, so we want to convert that muscle to muscle, not to fat. Okay, so interval training and resistance training, whether it's just bands, light weights, things like that, is going to be helpful. And then also 10,000 steps, so you still have to have that baseline burn. And then weekly sessions with the wellness coach. And so when we did all these different strategies for individuals, and I wouldn't put it in there, but there are medications that are incorporated with that too as well. Dr. Kolli mentioned the GLP-1s. Everybody's heard about those Lemke and Saxenda. These are exciting medicines, I think, in the world. So I think these are game changers. I really do in this world. I've got some concerns, and we're still looking at those right now. Basically, they are addressing some of the biologic abnormalities, so to speak, in there. So they absorb less sugar. You're going to get rid of that sugar faster. Your body's going to slow down the mechanism of emptying the gut, which is going to create the sensation of feeling full. And so there's a lot of things that these medicines can do. And they'll result in a pretty significant amount of weight gain, almost really good with bariatric surgery. Bariatric surgery has about 30% of your total body weight. That's how we kind of measure it, not in pounds, but in total body percentage. 30% is kind of the guideline for bariatric surgery. So you take somebody 200 pounds, that's a pretty significant weight loss. That's 60 pounds. So, again, that's a dramatic amount of weight. And number 5% weight loss, so 10% of your total body weight improves diabetes, may reverse diabetes. Not alcoholic fatty liver disease, it may reverse that. So a lot of things that it can be done with a small amount of weight. But these new medications, GLP-1s, Ozempics, and those of the world, I think are really going to make some differences there too as well. They are going to about 65 to 70% of people on, for instance, semaglutide, which is Ozempic, they saw about a 20 to 25% reduction in weight. So, but things, we got to stay on it. Well, if you stop, they go right back up. Number two is we're finding that some of that weight loss may have been more muscle than it was fat. Okay, so that's yet to be kind of worked through. And I told Dr. Kolli, I've had people with increases their resting heart rate. And so we're finding maybe a little higher incidence of some arrhythmias of the heart because of that too as well. So unfortunately, like every medicine, there's a good side, there's a bad side. But I think the summary of all this is, obesity is a disease. It's not somebody's willpower, and the fact that you're just not doing it right. Okay. And I think unfortunately society still views it that way. You just gotta walk more and you gotta eat less. No, that isn't working, obviously. So and number two is obviously we live in a society, as I say, obesogenic, the food we eat, the things that we do. We're not sleeping because we're on our phones at night. All of those things, we don't manage stress. Unfortunately, we're living in that world. So we got to swim upstream. We got to go upstream. We've got to go against the grain with that too as well. And then thirdly is I think these type of scenarios will play out in ways that give you an individual a much better chance of seeing what you want to see as a healthier life, healthier weight. And that it is not your fault. We need to work together in order to help you do that as well. So I'm done. Questions? Questions? That's not like
Doc, I have a question. So do you think, because I'm originally from the Philippines, and do you think it has something to do with the food too, or what they put in the food? Like sometimes, I notice like some chips are too salty, some candies are too sweet. It's really different. Like, so do you think?
Really good. So I think, so that's an example, so the answer is going to be, very, very complex. So like, for example, I think, so the way I think we make bread, wheat, how the wheat comes out, what gets done to wheat, what is the processing, they do play a role in absorption. So many times when there is a huge degree of marketing, so food is supposed to bring pleasure. Okay, so that is the marketing principle. If something makes you feel good after you eat, you're going to more likely to buy that more. So, which means I think, the main reason we should be eating is it should, I think, give us nutrition. So there is not a heavy marketing of food in many parts of the world. You buy rice, mom cooks food, grandma cooks food, and then I think you eat, because, you need to eat, you enjoy that, and then I think you move on. Ultra processing, the high degree of sugar, a high degree of, I think, color, those kind of things do impact our ability to, I think, have pleasure in food. I think, for example, I'm eating food, I think which has very little corn syrup, which is not going to increase the glucose as much. It's going to take a lot longer time to induce it as opposed to something that is done faster. The other thing is the higher degree of processing increases the shelf life of food considerably. That means food market price might go down, but if I'm selling a particular pasta brand, it doesn't go bad for 5 years. That means, I'm more likely to make more money. So it is complex. And the other factor is going to be, genetically modified versus non-genetically modified. And again, I think, what degree of, I think, fertilizer, organic versus non-organic, they all do play a role. But I think my thought is the more, I think, beautified or refined a food is, then I think, the higher the risk. The dyes that are added in, again, I think there's a high degree of inflammation that they can induce, and what they do, we do not know. So there is a family member, he's a businessman, his business is mainly, I think, selling candy. But the same candy brand, I think, is made by different manufacturers. Like I think, Hello Kitty, it's just a wrapping that gets changed. Teenagers don't know that they buy those things, and this chap makes money. He tells me that I think the candy that is available in some places like Dubai, when you compare it to the same, I think, candy, inside the same wrapper in the United States is vastly different. So the sugar ratio is high. Dr. Lemke, anything?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, I think the one thing you have to understand is it's not by chance, by the way. The food industry wants you to be addicted to their food. And I don't think that's any secret. They develop that food to become addictive. Fructose, I think Smart Circle was talking about fructose as a sugar. Fructose is metabolized much differently than other sugars, glucose and sucrose. Fructose goes, unfortunately, it takes sugar, it takes energy to actually manufacture, to metabolize that in our body. And it goes almost directly into the liver and stored as fat. Fructose doesn't really have a lot of energy value in the body. So when you see a label that says fructose, it is really not very energy efficient as compared to even other sugars. Not all sugars are created equal, fructose being one. And so that is, if you look at all your labels, you'll see that all label after label after label. It has a higher addictive property, but it also just is stored as fat much more. So if we got rid of all sugar-containing beverages in our society, wow, we'd make a huge difference on health and wellness. So that's a good example of where, and it's well known. I think we're where we were with cigarette smoking 40 years ago. Nicotine good or nicotine bad? I don't know. Now we know it is. Well, fructose good or bad? Well, not good. Not good.
Thank you.
Yep.
Talking about sugar, so what is the best way to break your sugar habit? Should you just cut out sugar altogether? Or how did,
We had that answer. We
if you're an alcoholic, stop drinking out.
Yeah.
So
It's not an easy question, and for different reasons. Because your body needs sugar, right? I mean, your body, your brain, there is a certain amount of sugar that your body does need to process that. And if you take artificial sugars, which is always a common question, what about artificial sweeteners? Well, in a nutshell, what happens is your body takes in that artificial sweetener, and your brain says, I think I want sugar. This is good. I need that, or whatever fasting state we're in, but it doesn't get it. And so it goes looking for more. So studies show that people taking more artificial sweeteners actually end up eating more sugar because the body goes out and looks for it more and stores it at a higher rate. So, artificial sweeteners unfortunately create more problems than what they do. So reverting to artificial sweeteners is probably not a good idea. As much as possible, substitute natural sugars. Natural sugars are generally contained in fiber. They then are digested at a different process down the digestive tract at a different point where they're not going to be stored as quickly. So if you can, as much as possible, don't go to the diet and the artificial sweetener part. Go more to the natural sugar in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, all those things. There's sugar in there. You'd probably be better off in there too as well. Even though you're getting sugar in there, it is definitely stored and metabolized differently.
Just like Dr. Lemke said, there are, I think, several body phenotypes, 4 clusters that we talked about. A good idea would be, not looking at, I think, one is making it a little bit more complex as opposed to refined. The second is the portions. So the portions, have gone up since the food availability has gone up, So again, I think, eating, I think, smaller portions, adding a salad, making sure, I think, we drink enough water, getting, I think, regular exercise on top of it. There is, I think, a candy, or I think sweet buying, those kind of things we do on a weekly basis, rationing it a little bit, and measuring what is going on. So those kind of things could be beneficial on top of what Dr. Lemke said.
Question, how is leptin resistance measured?
Just I think you measure, I think, the leptin levels, but currently it is largely, done in, I think, basic science researches. It is so common that we don't even need to, measure it, So few signs that go with it are, I think, particularly we see, some dark marks around the neck, groin, those kind of an area, which are, again, markers of, I think, insulin resistance. They coincide with, I think, leptin as well. So,
So it's safe to assume both are present.
It's safe to assume, I think both are present, and most of the time they are.
Clinically, you can measure leptin just like you do in insulin, OGTT with insulin levels and sugar levels. There are some places that are doing leptin studies with that too as well. So, and they can see just like it mirrors your insulin, high insulin in an OGTT means your body's had to put on more of that, and they're finding that correlates. So they use the insulin as a pro-marker for that, pretty much.
Yeah. And I think what you do, I think after you find high leptin, that's going to be the next approach. So
Yeah, you can measure that in diabetes, obesity. People with high obesity have high leptin, and it correlates pretty closely with insulin too.
You ever see perhaps your practice with treating depression overlapping with also treating obesity as well in sessions?
we do, because treating depression, some medicines that are used, not all, can promote weight gain. So it often, I think, begins with a risk benefit discussion. These are the options. And most of the time, when there is an active, lifestyle changes, which are sustainable ways of losing weight, improves as well. So there is less inflammation, less adiposity, and again, I think less leptin resistance, more BDNF,
About the obesity medications then, would that be also considerations?
They are, like the GLP-1 agonists, I have started prescribing some, which again, I think, do improve. The direct correlation with mood is yet to be measured. But I think, self-esteem improves, most of the time I see clinical improvement, as and when someone is losing weight, and again, I think, the depression scores starts plummeting down.
We gave you more hope than sadness. So
Yeah.
thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, at one point I thought, I think, it is the topic of
Pretty cute.